Okay, I have built an intersection using the intersection tool and added that to my corridor. And I just want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing here. So again, here's my intersection as part of an existing corridor. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here and look at some of these assemblies that were created automatically when I created that intersection object. So it created a whole bunch of assembly objects, and I'm going to go into the corridor properties and look at the parameters tab. And it created, when it created those assemblies, it also created several new baselines and regions that correspond with those baselines. And so you can see these are quadrants of the intersection that were created. And again, quadrants, so there's 4 of them. And then there's a few regions that were created sort of outside the center of the intersection, outside of those curb returns. And really, this intersection object is, it's got some problems. So in the horizontal here, in the plan view, you know, the curb and gutter changes when I get to my intersection. The sidewalk is not in the right spot, and the total width of my right-of-way has shrunk. You can see it shrinks down in certain places because the assemblies used are different from what we used when we created our 60-foot right-of-way. So what I need to do is identify which regions are associated with these new assemblies, and then go in and fix these assemblies to match what we used in our 60-foot right-of-way. And so here's one of the automatically generated assemblies. I have already fixed half of this assembly. Now in the 60-foot right-of-way assembly that we built, we did not use anything with a daylight. So these are daylight sub-assemblies that are sort of doing a cat's whisker out to the side. And the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of all of these daylight objects, because again, we didn't use any daylights. And I'm just going to select all of these daylight objects and delete them. And then I'm going to go into my tool space, and in the corridors group, I expand corridors, I can find my corridor. I'm going to right click on that and rebuild my corridor. Now one of the options when you rebuild, and likely you'll get some errors, and I'm just going to close that. When you go to rebuild your corridor, there is an option for rebuild automatic. I'll urge you to use caution on this automatic rebuild. I prefer to rebuild it manually, although you have to, every time you make a change, you have to rebuild your corridor model to see that change take effect. So I rebuilt the corridor, and now I've got no daylights outside the back of curb here. And the lane width, I didn't have to change the lane width because we're using a 12-foot lane, but what I need to do is, again, figure out which of these sub-assemblies are being used in those intersection areas, and make all of the sub-assembly properties match. So in this first assembly, I have made the left side match my 60-foot right-of-way. I need to do the same thing on the right. So I'm going to start by selecting the lane subassembly and going to the subassembly properties. The parameter I need to change here is from 2% to 3%. That's the only change I need to make on my lane. But there's a lot to change in the curb and gutter. Remember, we're using a D, what is it, a D312, I think, is the curb we're using. So I have, when I created that first curb model in my 60-foot right-of-way assembly, I wrote down all of the properties for these dimensions so I don't have to go through and figure them out again. And I'm just going to input a couple here real quick. And the last one. Okay, so I have basically forced all of those dimensions onto my curb, and then outside the curb I've got this urban sidewalk with boulevards. So I need to go back into my tool palettes, find that urban sidewalk, attach it to the back of my curb, and then change the parameters of this subassembly. So I know I had I think I used a 5-foot boulevard width for inside and outside, a 6-foot sidewalk width. I'll apply those changes, and now I can see my subassembly is basically the same as the one we built for our 60-foot right-of-way, the same as this one. Although I did not change, I guess I didn't change the curb on this subassembly. I'll go ahead and do that outside of a video, but as I have made some changes to those subassemblies, I need to go into the tool space again and rebuild my corridor to see those changes take effect. And again, I've got this error window that pops up, but now it looks like all of the regions that use that subassembly are consistent. So my sidewalk extends right up to, now this is going to be a new region called the curb return quadrant, and sort of everything outside those curb returns looks good. So I'm going to go back into my corridor properties, and I'm going to figure out what is the next region that I'm looking at. So here's regions. I'm gonna wait on the curb returns for just a second. So here the primary road full section looks good outside the intersection. It looks good inside the intersection. So I'm not going to mess with that right now. But I see this corridor section does not have the sidewalks extending with the boulevards. So this is the secondary road full section. That's the next assembly I need to attack. So I'm going to close this and go find my secondary road full section. So that would be this assembly here. And I need to make all of the same changes I did before. I need to change the lane slope. I need to mess with all of the dimensions in my curb. I need to add sidewalk and boulevard outside of that curb. And when I apply those changes, I should see this region will look much like this region. So the sidewalks will extend. Now, I'm also going to have to figure out which assembly is being used around these curb returns so that I can make it consistent through the intersection, right? I want my sidewalk to nicely transition through that curve, and so I'm going to have to figure out which assembly is being used in the intersection at that point and make those changes so that my curb and gutter and sidewalk and lanes and everything are consistent through the intersection. Now there are some vertical problems with our intersection, but we'll tackle those vertical problems in another video.